bring you high enough to see the water, but the view from the top is always a little better, but we'll manage where we are. I should have last evening, when I saw you at the house, asked you to put on your Herod shoes. You know, the tread on the bottom of your shoe, where you walk, you can tell who was walking there, right? Wherever Herod walked, you've got theaters and aqueducts and hippodromes, and that was the bottom of his footprint when he went down. Very heavy tread on this land. Very heavy. And much of it is still seen, yeah? And you can kind of track them as you go. I also want you to think about this. On the 4th of July or on other occasions, you go and see fireworks, right? And if you sit close enough to see where they're actually lighting them off, you see that thing in a tube, and then you see when it goes, this little trail of sparks, right? And then eventually it's, and how long does that last? And then it's gone, right?
Yep.
Now what's left to look at in this land, archaeologically, is this. What's left of it as it fizzles out. And what we tend to think is, this is what it looked like in Jesus' day. This is at the height of the Roman Byzantine Empire, like 500 to 600 years later. In Jesus' day, it was this. That's all you've got. You've got the potential of what it's going to be. You've got a trajectory set. For all of Herod's heavy footprint that he's leaving, it's just this as to what the land is going to be. All right? So what we need to do is sort of set ourselves on that trajectory, Rome coming in, changing the worldview and awareness, starting to change the way people think and the kinds of places people live in. But in Herod's day, the idea is just beginning. Jesus kind of catches it on the front of the wave just starting to come up. Yeah? It becomes famous later with Eusebius and Jerome and, all the big guys. But we're just starting to come up here. Now, the wave that Jesus is catching is a wave that is pushing in a direction that is in many ways very opposite of the flowering already that you have in the Old Testament of a different culture, a different way of life. A different way of life. I want you to do something right now that's very difficult. Probably the most difficult thing I'm going to have you to do the entire 2 weeks. I want you to look out here at the water. Later on our next stop, I'll let you touch the water. I want you to look out there, see the waves a little bit, the stillness of it, the sound of it. And I want you to look at it, and I want you to think about it the same way that a Judean in Jerusalem or a shepherd east of Bethlehem would think about it. Remember looking at the land through the eyes of its former inhabitants? Think about it like a Judean would look at it, or like a shepherd would look at it. I want you to look at it and be repulsed by it and terrified by it. You want nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. All right? This is wholly other. Really hard for people who live next to the ocean to think that way. Because what you have in the Bible is language that describes people and God, good and bad, evil and righteousness, all these kinds of things that involve life. And the language that is used is language that is from the heart of the people living up in Judea, Jerusalem and Bethlehem, where the comfortable, quiet life, the way it's supposed to be language, is the shepherd and the tent and the olive tree. And the language of chaos, uncontrolledness, and swallow up and kill you is the sea. The Canaanite god of chaos. Canaanites had lots of deities. The Canaanite god of chaos was named Yam, and Yam was the common noun for that, sea. And what we have then in the Bible is language where when God comes and creates a homeland for his people, where they're going to live life the way it's supposed to be, Genesis chapter 1. First thing he does is create light. The second thing he does is he pushes the water away so dry land can appear. And then creates dry land for people to live on. And when he decreates, when he takes it back, that's what event?
Flood.
That's the flood. Just 6 chapters later, when it all comes back over the top. Right? That's the judgment thing, when it all comes back over the top. When he wants to bring Israel out of Egypt to their homeland, what does he do? He pushes the water away so dry land can appear once again. Creates a passageway for Israel to cross. And then when the enemies come, what happens? The water comes back and drowns them. That's what that's supposed to do. Look, you can't even drink it because of the salt content. You can't irrigate with it. What good is it? It's of no good but to drown you from the point of view of ancient Israel. Right? You know the story of the guy from Galilee, the prophet from Galilee, who was called to go and preach against Nineveh. And he comes down to a port in Joppa. He goes down to the sea. This is Jonah. Down to the sea, down to a boat, down to the bottom of the boat. A prophet is called to go up. He's going down, down, down. And eventually at the end, of chapter 1, he's in the bottom of the sea and the sea is drowning him. He has to cry out and be saved. This is what happens when you go here. Let me give you another one, the book of Isaiah. This says it best. Isaiah chapter 57. Isaiah 57. This says it best. Verses 19, verses 20. Praise on the lips. Peace, peace to him who is far and near. Peace being life the way it's supposed to be. Says the Lord, I will heal him, but the wicked are like the tossing sea, that which cannot be quiet, tossing up refuse and mud continually. That's the image of this. It's just pushing up junk all the time from the bottom. That's Isaiah's image of wicked people. Now, it's not our image of wicked people, but you have to look at the land through the eyes of these folks to sort of understand what's happening here. There is no peace, God says, for the wicked. And at the very end, well, first this, Psalm 107. Psalm 107, those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on the great waters. They have seen the works of the Lord, the wonders in the deep. He speaks up, raises a stormy wind, lifts the waves to the sea, of the sea to the heavens, down to the depths. Their soul melts away. They reel and stagger like drunken people at their wits' end. It's the storm on the sea, right? How they have to cry to God to bring them into the desired haven, to peace again. It says here, He, God, caused the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed. Sounds like something Jesus does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And it's this reality that is encapsulated in the worldview of the Canaanites, and the Israelites living up in the hill country have the same idea, that there's something down here that's beyond our control. It's not useful to us either. We don't have the technology either. And there are people who can kind of make a living on it, but they're not us. They're a bit threatening, like the Phoenicians. It's so much so, guys, this idea is so much here that at the very end of the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, at the very end of the book of Revelation, when John sees a new heaven and a new earth, life the way it's supposed to be once again. I saw a new heaven, a new earth. The first had passed away. And there's only one thing he says to describe what the new heaven and new earth is going to be like. New heaven, new earth. The earth has passed away. First one. And there is no longer any sea. The sea is gone. The sea is not present in the new heaven and new earth. That does not exist.
What verse is that?
Revelation 21, verse 1. What that means is, of course, it's an image of all the evil and chaos and the death and the uncontrolled substance that this world has to offer, which is not going to be there. But he uses that as the example. All right? We're talking about a worldview that is comfortable up in the high, dry hills with the sheep and the goats and the olive trees and everybody under own vine and fig tree and quiet and secure and all of this stuff. All of that is good. And a worldview that sees the coastal highway out here as threatening and dangerous. This is your invasion route, and that is something you can't touch either. So there's a problem. The problem is that's also the direction that all the good fun stuff comes from. You know? All the good fun. The Phoenicians are bringing in products from who knows where that look good and make life comfortable, coming from that direction. Yeah. And between the testaments, after the old closes and the new opens, right between the two, right? The whole world shifts its orientation. It's no longer Egypt to Mesopotamia on the land traffic. Everything does this, 90 degrees. And now it's Greece and Rome, Alexander the Great. Maybe you've heard of him, another Mr. T. Alexander the Great opens this world up, and then eventually Rome comes in and uses this as the frontier, and they're showing up as sails popping off the horizon. They might as well be Martians. You can't chase them. I mean, they're strange people, funny language, you know, they dress funny, they talk funny. They're not Semites. I mean, we were conquered by Babylon, but at least he was a Semite. I mean, these guys, you know. And they're coming up. And the thing is, they're not only very different from us, they seem to be very powerful and successful in many, many ways. And that's very enticing for people who are a little bit maybe tired of where they are. Very enticing. And you've got here this culture clash coming in, this huge clash. It sets itself up on the coast and starts to penetrate into the hills in the time of the New Testament. And you got a message up here in the hills that is land-based, you might say Mount Sinai kind of Torah-based, that has to deal with it. Now what are you going to do? Everybody's changed. You know, look who's coming to church now, right? Now what are you going to do in this land? And does it fit or not? And you've got Jews who already live out in the Mediterranean, diaspora Jews, living out in Alexandria and Rome, you know. Paul is living already, Saul of Tarsus is living out there already. And they're fluent in Greek, and they probably are fluent in Latin, and they maybe dress like these guys. And what happened to their heart? Why aren't they living in Jerusalem like good Jews should? And does God have anything to say about them too? Out there. And questions start to arise, you know? How different can you be and still be? These questions are very alive in the first century. Not so much in the Old Testament, where you're still a bit tight and tribal, but it really is moving out by the time of the New, in the fullness of time. It's really moving out. So Herod becomes king. And as we've already said, Herod, his mom is a Nabatean, a desert Arab queen. His dad is a Jew. He's actually an Edomite who converted to Judaism, but they're desert people, landed people. And we've seen Herod already build desert palace fortresses, Jerusalem and other, you know, heading east. But he's not building them to look like good Judean buildings. He's building them to look like what's happening out there is penetrating in. And then he says, you know what, we've got to have a line on the sea. Rome needs a gateway in. Rome needs a gateway in. Now, let me pull out I think I only have my big map number 3, which you've marked. for Old Testament events that we're going to do later. What I want you to look at is this. I'll fold it this way so it holds up a little better. Right? You got the coastline? You got the coastline, all right? Pretty straight. You see that? Pretty straight. We're talking ocean-going, well, ancient equivalent, but still deep sea vessels. Straight line coast. This is not a natural harbor land at all. The straight line coast here, Jerusalem is right over here, tends to block Jerusalem from the coast anyway. Even if they wanted to go out there, there's no decent harbor. Up here, you see the coast up here in the north? That's Phoenicia. You got all these bumps in the water. You got all these natural inlets. The Phoenicians are the sailors. These guys are the sheep and goat guys. And you can see the coastline here. There's a little tiny bump at Joppa. It's not much. There are rocks offshore that wreck the boats as they try to land anyway. Just enough to kind of have a shelter. And this becomes a port. When Jerusalem has a strong king, they try to push down to Joppa and control it. It's not going to be the ocean liners, but you can manage. The only natural port in the country where the ground sort of allows it is way up here at a place called Akko. That's in Israel today. This big point is Mount Carmel coming in, where Haifa is today. But the ancient port, Akko, it's a little hook to keep the waves out. And the currents that are sweeping up this way, pushing the sand from Africa, Mount Carmel here pushes the currents out to the sea so that this doesn't become silted in very easily. But the hook keeps the waves down. So it's a natural port. It's the southernmost of the Phoenician ports. It's really part of Phoenicia, but Israel took it. All right? That's the natural port. The Joppa port takes you to Jerusalem. The Akko port takes you into Galilee, where we're going to be spending the next 3.5 days. So if you're a Galilean, you've got this. And Rome, of course, looking for the natural port, said, this is where we're going to penetrate into the country. All right? Like so. This was the Jewish capital. There was a tiny little fishing village here called Strato's Tower, not much. So Herod becomes king. Herod has to incorporate this land to Rome by a port. He could build the port at Joppa, bigger, and control Jerusalem. He could use the natural port that's already there at Akko. All right, he could do either one. Both of them already have economic loyalties and connections, and Herod would have to either change them or rob them to make it work for him, right? They're already established. So Herod does what Herod does. We need a port. Let me make a new one. Let me make a new one. So he goes to Strato's Tower on a straight line part of the sea that has, as you go out, you'll see there are places where the sandstone, where the sand dunes that have calcified, the sandstone kind of breaks out apart over there, again, to wreck boats up, but he kind of pushes it aside a bit and builds on it. By having a port here, look what he's done. He's got equidistant access to both Galilee and Judah. Either one is about the same distance away, all right? So he's kind of in the middle, control both. He's got a spot that is brand new without loyalties to other people. He can say, this is Herod's city. Better yet, I'll name it after my boss. I'll call it Caeserea, which he does. He puts a temple here to the divine Caesar. He builds a temple to Caesar Augustus here, all right? The one in Jerusalem's not the only one he built. That was to Yahweh. This one is to Caesar. He builds more than one. And he does what Herod does. I can't put a harbor there. Watch me. I can't win an election. Watch me. Right? He does what Herod does. And he creates with engineering techniques that are being developed in Rome for the first time in this land, he puts in a harbor and other things that make it work. Herod does what Herod does. And by doing that, architecturally, it's the big footprint. By doing that for worldview and for heart and soul, you tell me, what's he doing? Is he changing or trying to change the way people think? Change their loyalty from the Lord God and Torah and Jerusalem identity out to Rome? Or is he simply riding a wave that's already started? Does he create worldview change, or does he reflect and grab a hold of what's going to be there anyway? Both, actually, just like Hollywood. Do movies shape culture, or do movies reflect culture? They do both, for better or worse. And Herod does the same. Let's call him very he was the right guy at the right time for that to happen. And I would imagine, since this is Rome's gateway, Caesarea becomes, when it does this, right? It's the largest harbor in the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Bigger than all the natural ones. Better than Alexandria, better than Akko, better than Ephesus, bigger than any of them. This is what he does. All right? He sees it, he begins it, and so we need to give great credit for that. This becomes Rome's gateway in the land, and for the New Testament, we need to think about it as the penetration point of a very challenging way of life, or the exit point for a different way of life, the movement of the gospel. Right? Is this Rome sucking in and making you pagan, or is it the launch pad of the gospel to make them Christian? Which one is it? Which one is it? Yeah? It's going to be both, isn't it? It's going to be both. It's going to be both, yeah, as you go. It's going to be both. The idea that the sea is going to drown you, the sea becomes then the vehicle, the medium, the carrier of the message of life. Something's happening to the worldview. And I want to work down here and read a couple of passages in the book of Acts where the people from up there have to start to figure out how that works. What? You mean God is going to use that instead? We'd have to move out there to see it. Now, in your book, we have, you can either look now, look later, it's yours, yeah? We have on page 129, 130, 131 Caesarea pages. Let's see what Herod starts in terms of actual fact on the ground. All right, you can see the shoreline here. Nope, I didn't bring. You can see the shoreline here. There's one of the first things you always put in is the theater in the Hellenistic Roman city. You think of a Hellenistic Roman city. Think of the analogy of a church. What is the church? Is it the building or is it the people? Which is it? It's the people, right? Even though most people out there, when they think of church, they think of the building, don't they? They think of the physical structure. But the same way with the Greek cities and the Roman cities, it was the body politic, it was the people who would then build structures so that they could reflect who they are inside. And one of the first ones in is the theater, where down here in Greek or Latin, not in Hebrew, you would have worldview presented, either in play form or discussion form or debate form, why that's a better way of life than this, to help to change the worldview. Now, for one of the first buildings in, here in Caesarea as well, Herodian. Now, most of the time, when a theater was put in, it was put in so that y'all are facing that way. In other words, the opening is facing east or facing north. Because the activity here in the evening, when the sun is going down, The sun then lights up the actors' faces, and it's behind your head. This one is turned facing that. It's backwards for how it typically should be. All right, so then when the events take place, the sun is in the eyes of the audience, back of the head of the actors. Yeah? Now there would be a wall here to help prevent that, but it's still backwards from where it usually is. And I find that actually quite appropriate, because Herod and the others are inviting in the local population, and when you're sitting here, you've turned your back on Jerusalem, and you're facing your new life out here. Literally, you're facing Rome. You're facing Rome. So I think that's appropriate here. So the theater goes in. There's a bit of on this map, it's number 12, it says Herod's Palace. There's a bit of a point out here where the sandstone is kind of breaking away a bit. And out there, we'll walk out that direction, he builds a palace that is surrounded on 3 sides by the sea with a, let's say, a bedroom way at the end, like the front of a ship. Yeah. And like anybody do cruises, you know, and there's a swimming pool on the boat. Isn't that kind of funny? You're in the middle of the water and there's water on the boat, right? He does the same thing. He puts a big freshwater pool right in the middle of that palace stretched out into the saltwater sea. All right, this is Herod. And other things, including a harbor that stretches out a couple, 300 feet down. He uses local sandstone building blocks, and to stick the stones together, look, there's currents under there doing this. The ground is sandy. It's how do you stick the stones together so they're not going to... He uses, of course, concrete that hardens underwater, right? Well, we do it all the time now. He did it as well. First one in this part of the world to use concrete hardening underwater to build this harbor. We think he used diving bells, some kind of a big leather structure that you get in and there's still air in it, and you go down until you use all the air up and pop up again and go back down again with another stone and another bag of cement, right? He doesn't tell us how many people drowned in the process, but he builds a harbor, the foundations of which are still there. Yeah? I want to talk about that harbor in a bit when we kind of get around the corner and can reflect a bit on who used those boats. When you sailed in, number 5 on this diagram, a temple to the divine Caesar. I mentioned this. Caesar Augustus is the first Caesar who deified himself. Try that. All right? Try that. That's a challenge. Make yourself a god, right? Caesar Augustus said, that's me. Herod had a lot to go yet before he got to that point. And so what Herod did was what any good petty king did. He built temples in honor of the divine Caesar. In this land, he put up 3 of them. One of them was here. One was in Samaria. Another reason that the Jews in Jerusalem said, you guys can't be the right people. Yeah. Did you know that Herod paid for the Olympic Games? He was spreading money everywhere. This guy. Yep. Yep. All right. Questions or comments so far? Herod, yeah, he went to Rome more than once in his life. He would send his sons to Rome for education, so they would come back and know what to do. Yeah. Yep. 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 Part of the money was what we saw. We were yesterday in Jericho, and we saw the big tax routes coming through Jericho. Massive tax routes off of Saudi Arabia with the spices and things. Part of it was that. Part of it was he's in the corner of the Mediterranean that all of the empires wanted. Egypt, Babylon, Rome, Persia. Everybody wanted to be here because of the larger able to tax the trade going through. Herod did that in the 1st century. Yep.
Toll booths.
A lot of big toll booths, yeah. Zacchaeus got his pocket full. All right. Are you with me so far, guys? Talking about a challenge here to life. You know, yes. Oh, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, he was at a point where he had to impress Rome. He had to keep Rome happy, but there's a personality that attracts power, right? And on those criteria, he was very successful. Yeah. Spiritual life is another question, right? But on those criteria, he was very successful. Like a Napoleon, like an Alexander, I liken him to this is your kids or grandkids movie. You remember the Aladdin cartoon? Robin Williams was the voice of the genie. Some of you remember that? Yeah. Where the genie bemoans his fate. He says, the line is, unlimited cosmic power, itty bitty living space. He can't get out of the bottle. And this is Herod, because Rome kept him in Judea. You can't conquer. And so he made everything building inside instead. He used that energy to build and to create in a very tight space some of the most amazing places that the world has ever known. Yeah. Itty bitty living space. Yeah. Okay. Let's wander a bit, guys. I want to take you a couple of places, give you some